What is up, guys? Welcome back to the final two rounds of the Vasilis Theodoridis International Chess Tournament here in Kavala, Greece. My name is Titus Stromavicius, I'm a Grandmaster, and I want to share my experiences and games with you from the event. So going into the last two rounds, as you can see, I was ranked in third place, and although I was in third place, I didn't really have that great of a chance to finish first in the tournament anymore, because I was 1 point behind the leader, and I didn't get paired against him in the 8th round. So at the very least, I would need to win the last two games, which is already a very difficult task, but I would also probably need some help from someone else, as my tiebreaks were also inferior to the tournament leaders. So I kind of was more focused on trying to preserve my sort of standing place, which was in this large group of people tied for second. And in round 8, I got paired up against a Greek player, Spyropoulos Nikolaos, rated 24-28. And I was expecting him to play e4, and basically I had a choice of three systems, which one I would choose, and he was gonna go play the open Sicilian almost all the time, and I could have played, basically knight c6, and then after d4, cd4, knight d4, I can choose between knight f6, e6, or e5. Basically, are my three setups, and after brief consideration. And finding that my opponent actually played my brother a couple of years ago in the World Youth Under 16 Olympiad, I decided to repeat what my brother played. It just, I thought it would be quite fun. And also, I actually checked this line quite recently and thought it would be interesting to try in a real game, which was e6. After d4, cd4, knight d4, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, I entered the four knights sort of Sicilian. And although it is a Sicilian, it's definitely known more for its sort of drawish tendencies, especially if white plays knight db5, which is still the main move to this day. At the top level, people vary between knight db5 and knight takes c6. Both are considered quite different, but also that give white some slight advantage and some slight chance to develop an initiative. But my opponent played knight b5, which I expected, and I decided to try bishop c5, which I almost never play. I usually play bishop b4, and I basically acknowledge that I'm slightly worse, but I should be able to hold with precise play. There was a high-level game a couple of years ago, I believe, between Nepomniachtchi and Caruana, where Caruana sort of uncorked the ideas, and since then, the theory has developed a little bit, but basically the standing is that white is slightly better, white is pushing, but with correct play, black should be able to make a draw. But bishop c5 is a bit more dynamic, potentially, and I kind of wanted to try and tempt my opponent into going for some of these more dynamic options, with bishop f4, short castles, bishop c7, queen e7, bishop d6, bishop d6, queen d6, queen d8. This was all more or less expected. And now my opponent has, a variety of moves to choose from. Queen d2 is one, queen d3 is another one, knight c7 is another one, long castles potentially is a move, bishop e2 is a move. My opponent decides to do none of these. He decides to play queen c7, and I was sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily unhappy that my opponent played this move, but sort of, it was not my ambition to try and make a quick draw, because if I did, I would have played bishop b4 instead of bishop c5. Whereas after queen c7, I was trying to take some risks and, again, tempt my opponent to playing some of these more critical moves like bishop b2 or long castles, or even knight c7. And my opponent instead plays queen c7, which basically offers me a queen trade. And the theory proceeds as d5, takes, queen d8, rook d8. There is only one trick in this position. If white castles long, he's actually going to get into trouble after d4, knight e2, and knight g4, attacking the weak f2 pawn. But besides that, if my opponent plays knight e2 first, I decided to play d4 and offer my opponent a draw. And basically the line was that after d4, my opponent has to play rook d1. I played d3. And here he has an option of taking on d3 with the knight, with the rook or the pawn. I think it's more considered to be more correct to take with the rook. He after the game we briefly chatted, he said he was considering taking with the pawn, so maybe I still have some chances potentially to develop an initiative. But basically, if my opponent takes with the rook, rook d3 is actually a mistake. I believe bishop f5 is the correct move according to the computer, and then takes, c3, bishop e6, and a3 was one of the lines, and I couldn't remember exactly what I'm supposed to do here. And so that's why I offered my opponent the draw through d4 because I'm still a pawn down. If my opponent manages to consolidate, I could get into trouble. I believe the move was bishop c4, which, I mean, again, it's not a very obvious move at all in this position. So, sort of, I surprised my opponent with, some relatively unexplored lines and something he didn't expect. And my opponent was, burning some time. And he kind of happily accepted the draw, more or less, after d4. And I mean, queen c7 was indicative that he didn't really want a big fight, because if he did, he would have played some of the other moves. So a draw, basically eliminates from contention for first completely. And after drawing in round 8, a little bit surprisingly, I dropped all the way to 9th place. My tiebreak somehow completely collapsed. All of my opponents lost, and I was in shared third place, but I was in 9th on tiebreaks. So definitely a win in the last round would help my chances to sort of finish on the podium. But unfortunately for me, in the last round, I got a pretty bad pairing, I would say. I got the Chinese player Zhao Chenxi, who was having a very good tournament, sort of solid, 6 out of 8, same as me, 4 wins, 4 draws. Beat a higher player with black the last time. Subeli, actually, I think he beat with black. So my opponent definitely was sort of playing a really good tournament. And also, I just have sort of a complex against Chinese players, because they often play very fast, and they're like, little Nepomniachtchi type players, where they play fast, confident, and not necessarily always correct, but they still put you under a lot of pressure. So going to the round 9, I sort of knew my opponent was playing mostly Queen's Gambit decline setups, such as, against Queen's Gambit, Quindian was also an option. Anti-Catalan was also an option. So I was kind of preparing for mostly those, but my opponent surprises me a little bit with the, so to speak, improved Queen's Indian, where black plays b5. And a while ago, I checked some lines here with one of my coaches, and he recommended me to try knight e3, which I thought was quite interesting. And I thought, okay, I'll try this during the game. But of course, my opponent was well prepared. I was not, because I didn't expect this. And after a6, c4, queen b6, I was already out of book. I only knew, b4, I think I was familiar with, and cd4. And after cd4, there's some long lines where white can force a draw if he wants to, but he can also retain some pull potentially in some of those positions. But my opponent plays queen b6, and I immediately sink into some thinking, and I find the best move, of course, bishop b3 makes most sense. Just develop, and increase the pressure on the c5 pawn. So that was kind of a natural move. I also was considering bishop g5 to try and emulate some potential weakenings on the king side with bishop takes f6. But I thought the bishop was a little bit misplaced, and my opponent could potentially try to clarify the situation with cd4, for example, and I wasn't sure what was happening here with bishop takes a3, and potentially also playing on the diagonal here if I take with the knight. So I decided to play a bit more solidly, play bishop e3. My opponent keeps blitzing before knight c2, bishop e4. And after checking with the engine briefly, didn't have that much time yet, because I'm recording this right after the round 9 game. I believe the computer move was knight fe1, which to me makes, it does make sense, but it's also a very hard move to play over the board, sort of, if you don't know it. Just to sort of clarify the situation in the center as quickly as possible. Again, I was starting to think, and I just wanted to sort of keep, again, this solid approach to try and play for a longer game. D takes c5, bishop c5, bishop c5, queen c5, queen d4. I thought this was a nice centralizing move. My opponent plays d6. I had some options here. Again, I had an option to play, for example, knight d2. I thought was an interesting move. I thought that endgame could be potentially interesting to try and get the knight quickly to b3. If, for example, like this. If, for example, he takes, I can maybe even take on c5 first, and then play for some quick knight b3. Some a3 sort of quick breakthroughs. But in the end, I decided to sort of stabilize first, which was not the best move according to the engine, and maybe I should have done something a bit more direct. and played, to try and develop problems for my opponent immediately, pose problems immediately, and castles rook f d1, rook f8, rook c1, rook c8. So we complete development, and now kind of I started seeing the problem with my position, where I can't really make any sort of progress because my opponent is not only well centralized, but he could actually develop some sort of an initiative himself if I start going backwards with my pieces. Both of his knights are potentially ready to jump in if circumstances change. So I again tried to sort of clarify the situation a little bit, and we proceed to get this sort of an endgame, where if we played two equal rating players played with nothing at stake, I would assume a draw would be very quick here. Just trade everything on the D file and sign score sheets. But I felt like I still had some slight pull because I thought my knight on D3 is immediately targeting his C5 pawn, and potentially I thought I could develop or cause some problems to my opponent with this with a better knight against his more passive knight. As he plays 97. Unfortunately for me, that's not really the case because my opponent is also poised very well to sort of expand in the center and try to dislodge my knight on d3 with e5 and then potentially e4. And what I started doing right now was too desperate to try and create some winning chances. I should have probably just played some f3, e4 setup. And again, a draw would be a very likely result and a very sort of natural result. Instead, I wanted to try to play for rook a1 and e3. Which I managed to get in, but here my opponent correctly judges that he can actually play b3, and this pawn, while it looks sort of far advanced and cut off from any support, unfortunately for me it's very hard to win this pawn without compromising the rest of my position. If my king was already on d2, then it would be sort of a different situation, but unfortunately my king is still very far, and my opponent again can just play actively in the center, king d6, basically with the idea to play knight e5. Again, as you can see, my rook is sort of quite misplaced on a3 compared to his rook on b8, which is always ready to be activated with rook b4 if my knight were to leave the outpost on d3. I played f4 to try and restrict my opponent's knight, e5, king f2, f5, and here I should have, well, not should have, I should have done anything else what I did in the game, but I started thinking for a while here. I was already quite a bit behind on the clock, about 40 minutes, as my opponent was completely blitzing the entire game, as again a lot of Chinese players tend to do, I noticed, especially the younger ones. And I thought for quite a bit, and somehow I don't know what happened. I mean, it's just yeah, a bad streak, sort of complete burnout, I guess. What I should have played was probably king e1. It looks a little bit passive, but again, the idea is just to bring the king closer to the queen side and potentially play for some knight c1 ideas as well, and take this pawn on b3. And the position remains roughly balanced, but obviously like the position's character changed quite a bit from the start of this endgame rather. And while the position might be equal, it's definitely not drawn, so to speak. There's definitely a lot of play now left in this position, and all three results are possible. After king e3, the evaluation shifts from equal to -7 for black, actually, which might not seem like it, but the computers are very strong these days. They see many moves in advance, and they claim that this position is completely lost for white, which it is, of course, after the simple move e4, and after knight c1, knight b6. And basically the trick is I can defend the pawn on c4. So I take on b3, and my king unfortunately is also cut off, has to go to f2, as it's the only move, and knight takes b3, and as you can see, my pawns on b2 and a4 will fall, and I'm just gonna be like 2 pawns down more or less in a knight ending. And my opponent plays very sort of cautiously with king c6, which I think is one of the best moves probably. Maybe king d5 was also playable. And I honestly just wanted to resign basically after e4, because I noticed in this position that my position is just crumbling. But I continued the agony for another 20 moves. But the evaluation of the position never shifted. It seemed like I was coming close after my opponent plays g6 here. I thought maybe I have some chances to save the game, but unfortunately with only moves, my opponent still manages to consolidate, and even though I managed to win the pawn back, he has a far advanced pass pawn, And as we know, as most of you know, in 9-10 games, corner pawns are very strong, and this example is no different. And again, a couple of moves, of Agony later, um, the game sort of ends after knight f4. If these pawns were not H pawns and these pawns were G pawns, there would be some chances, as I would have a square right here. Let's call it I7 in this case, and I could potentially capture the pawn and liquidate into knight king against king sort of situation, but unfortunately I can't. And I end the tournament miserably on a loss, in a position where I should never lose. But credit to my opponent, he came well prepared, and then he equalized, and I kind of tried to push in an endgame that I thought was a little bit better for me, but of course it wasn't. And then I played some passive moves, and I got swiftly punished for them, and I blundered, of course, at the end with king e3. So a disappointing, to say the least, finish. Losing with white is never good, especially in the last round where you're playing for prizes, for places, for glory, so to speak. Also against a low-rated player. But yeah, I feel a little bit burned out, not gonna lie. I feel like I played a lot of chess this year. I think my opponents have a lot of ammunition to prepare against me because I've played so much. And I think my opening repertoire is not wide enough to sort of deviate consistently and avoid all of these sort of preparations from my opponents. Because I believe I never actually saw my opponent play this line before in the database, so he definitely came prepared, expecting me to play d4 and f3 or then f3 d4. And yeah, what's next? Well, I have an event in Morocco in about a week, I think. It's pretty strong. I'm going to leave a link to the sort of pre-registered list in the comments, or in the description rather. So we'll play in Morocco. It should be a very strong event. I think I'm maybe not even in the top 15th in the starting list. So it should be fun. Hopefully I can play better, because these last couple of events just have been complete misery. Playing badly. It's no fun, When you play badly, it's no fun. You feel sort of helpless, like there's nothing you can do. And then after Morocco, Portugal, at the end of August rather, beginning of September. Should be an interesting event as well. Am I open? So those are my next two events. We'll see if I do the recaps. Again, if I feel like I'm playing like complete monkey, I'll probably won't. But if I feel like I actually have some chances to develop, to do some good chess, to play some good games, then you can expect some recaps from those events as well. So that's the journey. That's the journey in Greece ending. I appreciate everyone watching. I appreciate everyone tuning in. I wish I could have done better, but it is what it is. Such is life. I already went through the stages of grief during the games, sort of. I'm very quick to recover these days, where it just takes me about 20-30 minutes. So I'm no longer too upset about the game, but it still hurts. But anyway, thanks to everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you at the next events.